The TNT Subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. Recent focus on Iran has centered on Tehran's quest for nuclear weapons, but the Iranians and their proxy Hezbollah also use terrorism to threaten global stability. Hezbollah enjoys the full backing of the Iranian regime. The supreme leader and the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps direct Hezbollah's global terror campaign. Years ago, Hezbollah was a limited regional threat. Today, it's an international movement conducting terrorist and criminal acts in several parts of the world. Your attention can be directed to the poster on the right here showing some of Hezbollah's activities since 2010. Hezbollah is responsible for plots and activities throughout the world. Attempted assassination of Israeli diplomats in New Delhi in India, February 2012. Potential involvement in the bombing of an Israeli diplomat in Tbilisi, Georgia, February 2012. Storing over 8,000 pounds of explosive material in a warehouse in Thailand uncovered in January of this year. Attempted assassination of Israeli targets in Bangkok in February of this year. Attempted laundering of approximately $70 million from Venezuela to Germany in January 2013. Running training camps and international narcotics smuggling operations in Venezuela, Bolivia, Honduras, Nicaragua, and even Mexico. Suicide bombing of a bus of Israeli tourists in Bulgaria in July 2012. In addition to these attacks, Hezbollah may have had a hand in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and Quds Force plots, such as the attempted assassination of the Saudi ambassador to the United States in Washington, D.C. in October 2011. The uptick of Hezbollah's activity in recent years is a direct result of Iran. The Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, recently described the Iran-Hezbollah relationship as, quote, a partnership agreement with the Iranians as the senior partner. The Iranian agents running Hezbollah are the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Quds Force. General Qasem Soleimani is the leader of the Quds Force. In his role, he serves as the de facto director of Hezbollah. Now Major General, which is the highest ranked in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, he has been the mastermind behind key Iranian foreign policy moves. He helped Iran grow its influence in Iraq and continues to support the murderous Assad regime in Syria. American and British intelligence officials draw comparisons between the real-life Iranian general and the fictional Soviet spy master Karlov, John DeClare's Cold War novels. Only Soleimani is real, and his war with the United States is real. Hezbollah is using social media to spread its propaganda and get new terrorist recruits. As of August, Hezbollah had tweeted an average of 250 tweets a day and had 18,000 plus followers. Clearly, Hezbollah understands the value of Twitter when it comes to spreading its propaganda. Too bad Twitter and our own government don't recognize it too and prohibit the advertising of Hezbollah terrorism. Hezbollah is also getting information via apps on smartphones. BlackBerry and iPhone users who download an app called WhatsApp can get daily updates from Hezbollah. WhatsApp is one of the top overall paid apps, and the company is based in Dallas. The IRGC, Quds Force, and Hezbollah don't have to go it alone. They maintain lots of friends and allies in the world. The Venezuelans, under the Chavez regime, serves as one of the Iranians' closest allies. Hezbollah has used Venezuelan banking sector to launder hundreds of millions of dollars a year and smuggle narcotics to the United States and even European markets. Hezbollah has also conducted terror training in the Margarita Island for recruits from Venezuela and other Latin American countries. Hezbollah operatives and their co-conspirators hold senior positions in the Venezuelan government. They provide travel documents, weapons, logistic support to terrorist operations and cocaine smugglers, as our witnesses will explain further. In Afghanistan, the Iranians provide arms and training to Taliban fighters to kill United States and Afghan forces. In Africa, Iran and Hezbollah are expanding their terrorist and criminal networks in places like Senegal and Gambia. In Asia, let it be China, or be it China or North Korea or smaller countries like Malaysia, the Iranian Hezbollah conspirators are outpacing our ability to constrain them. So far, U.S. efforts to combat the expanding threat have fallen short. Sanctions are necessary, but they're not enough to counter the expanding activities as Hezbollah and the IRGC. Despite several international pressures, the EU has flat out refused to declare Hezbollah a terrorist group. This is too bad. This would pave the way for additional sanctions. If Western leaders continue to allow these actors to engage in a global campaign of terror without some repercussion, a dangerous precedent will be set. Hezbollah is not going away. It's even more troubling to imagine what the Iranians might be empowered to do if they're allowed to develop nuclear weapons. The United States and its allies must understand this threat, develop a comprehensive strategy on their own to confront these activities of Hezbollah and Iran. I'll now yield 5 minutes to the ranking member, Mr. Brad Sherman from California, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. Iran indeed presents a global challenge to the United States, and Hezbollah is a major part of that challenge. The United States is building a coalition of countries that are confronting Iran in meaningful ways. Unfortunately, what we're doing now is exactly what we should have been doing in roughly 2001. That doesn't mean we're doing the wrong thing, it just means we have to do more and we have to do it quicker. The Europeans or elements in Europe have asked us not to take military action against Iran and to use our good offices to persuade Israel not to do so as well. That being the case, you would think that Europe would do everything possible to assist us in using non-lethal methods to control Hezbollah and, more importantly, to stop the Iran nuclear program. One important step that European countries could take would be to list Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. They are on the spear of Iran's efforts to influence the world and to carry out terrorism in virtually every continent. As to Latin America, the United Nations Security Council approved the first round of UN sanctions in 2006. Ahmadinejad embarked on a tour of Latin America to try to emerge as a leader of anti-Americanism, not only in Venezuela, but also Bolivia, Nicaragua, and Ecuador. Hezbollah and Iran have expanded their operations in Latin America, especially fundraising for illicit activities. This subcommittee and others and the full committee have focused on how Hezbollah has been involved in the tri-border region where Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina come together. An extensive smuggling network there run by Hezbollah funnels large sums of money, and there have been reports of training camps in the region. They have been able to cultivate ties to narco-traffickers and other criminal enterprises, and even to government officials. And as they engage in narcotics activity, they're able to combine the true believer dedication of some of their operatives with the lucrative opportunities provided by the drug trade. We should point out that Hezbollah and Iran working together blew up the Buenos Aires Jewish Community Center late last century. That illustrates that Iran and its ally Hezbollah, or proxy, poses a greater danger perhaps than North Korea, although Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. Iran's desires to influence the world go all the way to Buenos Aires, which is as far from Tehran as you can get, I believe, on this planet. In contrast, the thugs who run North Korea seem mostly focused on maintaining their power in North Korea. The presence of Hezbollah in the region could very well serve as an important part of Iran's campaign to retaliate for efforts to curtail its nuclear program. One need look no further than the Quds Force sponsors efforts to kill the Saudi ambassador in Washington, and the attack in Israeli interests in Europe and Asia to see examples of what we could see in the future. To that end, I worked along with Chairman Poe and the author of the bill, Mr. Duncan, on the Countering Iran in the Western Hemisphere Act of 2012, which raised the profile of this problem and hopefully provided the Obama administration with tools that it will use to combat it. This legislation, of course, was signed into law last December. As to Syria, Hezbollah has an active part in the defense of the criminal Assad regime. Tehran has been sending commanders and fighters from Hezbollah and from the Revolutionary Guard Corps to Syria, as well as providing aid in arms. For those who question whether we should provide spare parts to Iran's supposedly civilian aircraft as, quote, the humanitarian thing to do, I would say those planes should be grounded until Iran grounds its nuclear program. But those planes right now are carrying those who would kill thousands of Syrians, and the humanitarianism requires that we not provide spare parts to make sure those planes can do even more damage to the people of Syria. It appears that Hezbollah has a force of up to 50,000 rockets trained on Israel. Before Iran develops a nuclear weapon, those rockets are a way of trying to threaten Israel into not doing something militarily. After Iran, if God forbid, has a nuclear weapon, we will see terrorism with impunity, and Iran's nuclear umbrella may allow Hezbollah to fire those rockets and also have defense. I see my time is more than expired. Let me just add that the transfer of chemical weapons to Hezbollah needs to be the reddest of red lines for the Assad regime, and I yield back.
I recognize members for a 1-minute opening statement. Mr. Yoho from Florida, you're recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Berman, for holding this hearing today. Today's topic is an important
Point of personal privilege. That would be Sherman.
I'm sorry, sir. Thank you.
Quite a difference between the two.
My apologies. We cannot hope to effectively deal with Iran until we understand the relationship between Iran and Hezbollah. And as Iran's de facto enforcer, Hezbollah has and will continue to be a large threat to not only peace in the region, but the world at large. I look forward to your testimony, and I've never seen this kind of involvement in the Western Hemisphere when you see Hezbollah going into South America in the reaches and the tentacles it has, and I look forward to what you say about it and how we, on a foreign policy side, can help stop that. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, all the witnesses' prepared statements will be made part of the record. I ask that each witness keep your presentation to no more than 5 minutes. I will now introduce the 3 witnesses that we have before they give their testimony. Mr. Will Fulton is an Iran analyst with the Critical Threats Project at the American Enterprise Institute. His research focuses on the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, Quds Force, and Iran's Global Force Protection Network. Dr. Matthew Levitt is the director of the Stein Program on Counterterrorism and Intelligence at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He previously served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Analyst at the Department of the Treasury and as the State Department's Counterterrorism Advisor to the Special Envoy for Middle East Regional Security. He is also the author of forthcoming book, Hezbollah, The Global Footprint of Lebanon's Party of God. Ambassador Roger Noriega is the founder and managing director of Vision Americas, which advises the United States and foreign clients on international business issues. He's also a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Prior to these roles, he was the United States ambassador to the Organization of American States and Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs. Mr. Fulton, we will start with you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today alongside my esteemed colleagues. The Islamic Republic of Iran is first and foremost concerned with regime preservation. So when we talk about Iran's global terror campaign and Iran's relationship with Lebanese Hezbollah, we must think about it in that context. Iran has established a substantial global force projection network that includes the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, or IRGC, and the Quds Force, Hezbollah, and proxies in Iraq and Gaza. And although these groups may justify their activities in religious and ideological terms, at the end of the day, they are a power projection, deterrent, and retaliatory force. The regime's vulnerability and relative military weakness demand an aggressive and far-reaching asymmetric capability. As a result, Iran's leaders have crafted a national security policy designed to protect the regime from external threats by demonstrating a capability to strike U.S. and Israeli interests anywhere in the world. And this strategy dates back to the regime's earliest years. Ultimately, Mr. Chairman, the IRGC is responsible for Iran's global force projection. The IRGC's mission is regime preservation and is responsible for every related internal and external security task required to accomplish this mission. The IRGC is a highly structured organization led by a small core network of individuals. This group fought side by side during the Iran-Iraq War, where they developed professional military experience as well as enduring personal relationships. They are battle-tested commanders who played key roles early on, leading to increasingly important roles later, including within the Quds Force. The commander of the IRGC, Major General Mohammad Ali Jafari, reports to Iran's supreme leader. Each of the IRGC's 5 combat service commanders report directly to Jafari, except one. Quds Force Commander, Major General Qasem Soleimani, also reports directly to the Supreme Leader. Soleimani has the trust and confidence of the Supreme Leader and has had it for over 15 years. Any Quds Force activity has tacit, if not explicit, approval of the Supreme Leader. I think that this is one of the most important points to understand when we think about the complicity of Iran's top leadership and the global activities of the Quds Force, its partners, and proxies. The notion that Quds Force operations are undertaken by rogue elements is implausible and not supported by any available information. Iran has provided continuous, substantial support to Hezbollah since the 1980s, and their partnership has materialized in the form of multiple terrorist attacks around the globe, targeted assassinations, and military operations in wartime environments. During the Iraq War, the Quds Force worked closely with Hezbollah to train, fund, and arm Iraqi Shia militant groups, and plan and execute attacks against U.S. and coalition forces. I'd like to pick out just a couple of examples where Quds Force commanders involved in Iraq have resurfaced recently. In 2007, senior Quds Force commander Abdul Reza Shahlai, along with a senior Hezbollah commander, planned the infamous attack in Karbala, Iraq that resulted in the deaths of 5 U.S. soldiers. Shahlai later went on to help plan and facilitate the failed 2011 plot to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. here in Washington, D.C. The Quds Force's number 3 in command was also active in Iraq. Mohsen Chizari, the head of Quds Force operations and training, was arrested in Baghdad in 2006 by U.S. forces, but was quickly released at the insistence of Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, who cited diplomatic immunity. Now, Chizari is considered one of the key members of the Quds Force's training and advising mission fighting to keep Bashar al-Assad in power in Syria. Syria is enormously important to Iran. It has long been Iran's closest state ally. It has provided Iran access to its proxies and partners. Iran has invested in Syria as a strategic ally as part of its deterrence against Israel. Iran's primary goal, then, has been to preserve Assad for as long as possible. But Iran is also working aggressively to establish a militant network that will enable them to retain a certain level of capability in post-Assad Syria. As you might expect, the Quds Force has been leading Iran's efforts in Syria. Just last month, a brigadier general in the Quds Force with substantial ties to Hezbollah by the name of Hassan Shatari was killed near Damascus after having been in Aleppo. We don't know exactly what Shatari was doing in Syria, but we suspect that he was on a mission related to the Asafir chemical weapons and missile storage facility near Aleppo. Shatari was important enough that Qasem Soleimani personally delivered the news of his death to Shatari's family and wept openly at his funeral. Senior Hezbollah officials also traveled to Iran to attend Chaudhry's funeral. Hezbollah has been integral to Iran's efforts in Syria, which has collaborated with the Quds Force in several areas, including training, advising, and arming pro-Assad forces. Iran, along with Hezbollah, may achieve some success with its strategy in Syria, but Iran's efforts offer only a temporary solution to Tehran. A rump Alawite state or a militant network cannot provide Iran with the same level of deterrence or political and economic support as Assad's Syria. This is why I think the fall of Assad has serious implications for Iran's global force projection strategy, and I'll conclude on this point. As the conflict in Syria stretches on and Iran sees its strategic depth continually eroded, they're likely to seek to expand their operational territory. The interception in January of an Iranian weapons shipment containing sophisticated Chinese-made anti-aircraft missiles and large quantities of light arms, ammunition, and explosive material destined for al-Houthi rebels in Yemen suggests that Iran has already ramped up its support for militants in at least one area. We should look for similar behavior in other areas where Iran has a presence. And finally, if you're wondering what a more active Iranian global force projection network might look like, consider the past 2 years, where we've seen a plot to conduct a mass casualty attack here in Washington, and plots in Georgia, India, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Kenya, and Nigeria. We've seen Iran become more risk-prone in its behavior, and we are likely to see this trend continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fulton. Dr. Levitt.
Thank you, Chairman Poe, Ranking Member Sherman, distinguished members of the committee. It's an honor to appear before you again this morning to discuss the nature of the global terrorist threat posed by Iran's strategic partner and principal terrorist proxy, Hezbollah. The nature of this threat has indeed increased dramatically over the past few years. Today's hearing on Hezbollah's strategic shift is extremely timely. This week marks the 21st anniversary of the 1992 Israeli embassy bombing in Buenos Aires. Failure to respond to that attack emboldened Hezbollah, which incurred no cost for that attack. 2 years later, Hezbollah struck again, this time escalating from a diplomatic to a civilian target and blowing up the Amia Jewish Community Center, also in Buenos Aires. Hezbollah is watching Europe and the West closely right now, much as it watched Argentina 21 years ago this week, to see if there will be any consequence to its recent escalation of terrorist activity around the world. Today's hearing is also well-timed because tomorrow is a critical day for Hezbollah, the West, and Europe in particular. This is because a verdict is expected tomorrow in the case of Hussam Yaqub, a self-confessed Hezbollah operative now on trial in Cyprus. You have the flyer from my book, and in there I get into in great detail Hezbollah's global footprint, its activities in North America, South America, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. I won't go into that right now. But as Director of National Intelligence James Clapper testified just last week before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and I quote, "We face uncertainty about potential threats from Iran and Lebanese Hezbollah, which see the United States and Israel as their principal enemies." He continued, "We continue to assess that Hezbollah maintains a strong anti-U.S. agenda, but is reluctant to confront the United States directly outside the Middle East. But Hezbollah is certainly active well beyond the Middle East, and that uncertainty about these potential threats stems from Hezbollah's recently increased global terrorist activities. Hezbollah today has two distinct operational trends. One involves its intent to avenge the death of Imad Mughniya, killed in Damascus in February 2008. Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, promised at the time open war, which is a quote, against Israel. They intend to target a current or former Israeli official in response, and they've tried several times since, and they have failed. The second operational trend is their effort to target Israeli tourists internationally as part of Iran's shadow war with the West. And here again we see Hezbollah acting outside the Lebanese interest, completely and only in the interest of its strategic partnership with Iran. There are two key dates to understand this latter threat. The first is September 2009, where after several failed attempts to conduct an attack against the Israelis to avenge Mughniya's death, they tried again in Turkey in September 2009, targeting a consul general in Istanbul. They failed despite extensive and increased Quds Force logistical support for that attack, leading Hezbollah and Iran to yell at each other. You're not good enough anymore. You're not providing as much support as you used to. As they're arguing with each other in January 2010, someone assassinates Professor Mohammadi in Tehran with a sticky bomb. Professor Mohammadi was a particularly important person in Iran's nuclear program. And at that point, Iran decides that two things will happen. The one is that the Quds Force will create a new unit, Quds Force Unit 400, specifically to target Western diplomats abroad and also targets reflecting Israel. That is to say, Jewish targets. For example, the plot in Baku targeting 2 Jewish rabbis in a Jewish school. And the second is that Hezbollah would get its act together, would re-energize itself, rejuvenate the Islamic Jihad organization, recruit people with foreign passports who could travel abroad, and begin to target Israeli tourists worldwide. And this happened. Hezbollah has been recruiting people with foreign passports from Sweden, from Canada, and Australia, just to give some examples. They've returned to old-school tradecraft, and they have presented threats in Azerbaijan, Thailand, Cyprus, Bulgaria, kidnapping plots in Africa, delivering weapons to Houthi rebels in Yemen, and more. According to Bulgarian authorities, 2 of the 3 suspects in the July attack there last year were foreigners. One had an Australian passport, one had a Canadian passport. One returned back to Lebanon through Poland, and one through Romania. But while that attack killed several people, the one that's going to have a bigger impact on Europe is the one that doesn't involve intelligence and information that won't be shared publicly, but the one that happened and was thwarted 2 weeks earlier in Cyprus, where that information is now not classified but being presented in open court and European court, undergoing complete European judicial review, including cross-examination by defense, and that verdict is expected tomorrow. Hussam Talib Yaqub has described himself as a Hezbollah operative. In an eerily similar plot to the one in Bulgaria, he was conducting surveillance of Israeli tourists arriving there. At one point, he said, "I'm not Hezbollah." Later, he said, "I didn't tell the whole truth. Something weird was going on, and when Hezbollah told me to conduct surveillance of an airplane, maybe they were plotting to bring down an airplane. I don't know, I'm just speculating," he said. Later, he said he was not part of a terrorist plot in Cyprus at all. Instead, he said, and I quote, "It was just collecting information about the Jews, and this is what my organization does all over the world." Hussam Yaqub is a European citizen. He's a Swede who grew up in Sweden. His father still lives there. The rest of his family is in Beirut. Before being sent to Cyprus to carry out this attack, he was sent on missions. He described them as missions. I'm not describing them as missions. This is his word. As a courier, first to Turkey, then to Lyon, France, to meet some Hezbollah operative there, then to Amsterdam, to meet some Hezbollah operative there. Taken together, the Bulgarian and Cypriot cases present compelling evidence of Hezbollah's continued operational activity, specifically in Europe. Hezbollah is watching Europe and the rest of the international community closely, much as it watched Argentina 21 years ago this week. Argentina failed to respond to Hezbollah's challenge then and suffered the repercussions 2 years later. Europe has an opportunity now to avoid that same mistake and should designate Hezbollah in whole or even just in part as a terrorist group for executing terrorist plots on the continent. History suggests that failure to do so could result in still more attacks by an even still more emboldened Hezbollah. Thank you.
Ambassador Noriega.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I applaud you and other members of the subcommittee for focusing attention on the global threat posed by Hezbollah, and I thank you for inviting me to share insights about that terrorist organization's growing network in the Americas that carries that threat to our doorstep. Mr. Sherman and Dr. Levitt referred to the 92 and 94 bombings in Buenos Aires for which Hezbollah is considered responsible, and Iran. This is Hezbollah's despicable legacy in the Americas, and that terrorist group, along with Iran, has returned to the scene of the crime. During the last decade, Hezbollah has extended its reach quickly and substantially in dozens of countries in the Americas. This surge can be attributed to 2 key facts. Hezbollah counts on the direct political, diplomatic, material, and logistical support of governments, including one in this region, Venezuela, which has little in common with Iran, but its hostility to the United States. Also, to facilitate its smuggling, money laundering, training, and fundraising activities, Hezbollah collaborates with well-financed drug traffickers and narco-guerrilla groups with deep roots in the region and sophisticated smuggling and money laundering networks worldwide. I believe this challenge must be understood as the product of a conscious strategy of rogue regimes, Iran and Venezuela, to wage asymmetrical warfare against the United States' security, interests, and allies close to the homeland. This unconventional challenge and each of its political, criminal, and terrorist components requires a much more robust and comprehensive response. Allow me to share some of the details that explains the breadth and the depth of what Hezbollah is up to in our hemisphere. 2 terrorist networks proselytize, fundraise, recruit, and train operatives on behalf of Hezbollah in many countries of the Americas. One of these is parallel networks is operated by a Lebanese-born Ghassiates Nezzardine Abu Ali. That Nezzardine clan is based in Venezuela. and another is managed by Mohsen Rabbani, a former Iranian diplomat and Muslim cleric who was wanted for his role in those 92 and 94 bombings. Hezbollah operatives and their radical anti-Semitic allies use their senior positions in the Venezuelan government to provide logistical, material, and even diplomatic and political support to help Hezbollah and other terrorist groups grow stronger very close to our homeland. In recent years, the Chavez regime has sent weapons to Hezbollah, and it has shipped refined fuel to Hezbollah's allies in Iran and Syria. Venezuela's Margarita Island has become a safe haven for terrorists and drug smugglers. Hezbollah operates numerous businesses and safe houses in Venezuela, and it has provided terror training in that country for recruits from that country as well as from other countries in Latin America. Numerous Latin American governments have detained Iranian and Lebanese and other persons carrying authentic Venezuelan passports among the thousands of Venezuelan passports and other documents that were issued to people of Middle Eastern background in the last dozen years. The state-owned airline of Venezuela, Conviasa, provides Iran, Hezbollah, and associated narco-traffickers a surreptitious means to move personnel, weapons, contraband, and other material in and out of this hemisphere. The Lebanese drug lord Ayman Juma was indicted in the United States in November 2011 for running cocaine smuggling and money laundering schemes that benefited Hezbollah. His network, which laundered as much as $200 million a month, involved criminal associates and corrupt businesses in Colombia, the United States, Mexico, Panama, Venezuela, as well as Lebanon. Also in recent years, Mexico has arrested numerous individuals associated with Hezbollah engaging in various criminal activities, including smuggling of persons across the U.S. southwest border. Mr. Chairman, I believe that the foregoing discussion about the facts on the ground would lead most reasonable observers to conclude that Hezbollah is a problem in the Americas that can no longer be ignored. And I will highlight just a few recommendations on how we ought to respond. First, congressional leadership is absolutely essential. And the pressure from this body is really important to get executive branch agencies to act more decisively. Legislation that Mr. Sherman referred to, I think the chairman referred to as well, passed by this Congress with strong bipartisan support late last year, requires the State Department to report to Congress on Iran's activities in the region and to provide a strategy for countering this threat. This committee must insist on a whole-of-government response from the State Department. In some cases, you might decide that more resources are needed by the intelligence or law enforcement organizations responding to the threat. But also, political will is just as important, and that requires pressure and oversight to ensure that the executive branch acts responsibly and vigorously. The links between Venezuelan officials and state-run entities with drug trafficking, terrorism, Iran, and Hezbollah must be on the table as the State Department presents tough conditions for normalizing bilateral relations with Venezuela in a post-Chavez era. In the meantime, this criminal activity must be publicized and punished in the form of federal indictments. Administrative sanctions are good interim measures. However, the Department of Justice should be asked, where are the indictments? And finally, the narco-terrorism on our doorstep, advanced by Hezbollah with Iranian and Venezuelan support, demands a response from those whose job it is to keep us safe. Our government must take effective measures to disrupt and dismantle illicit operations and neutralize unacceptable threats before it is too late. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I'll thank the witnesses for their testimony. The rest of their testimony will be made part of the record. Some observations. We have a map of some of the activities of Iran and where their tentacles of terrorism through Hezbollah have moved throughout the world. I suspect that if we come back a year from now and we have a similar hearing, we will have more red lines throughout the world instead of fewer red lines. Hezbollah is moving throughout the world, and I think the situation, based on your testimonies, is getting worse. Ambassador Noriega, you mentioned in your testimony that Hezbollah working in the Americas directly in the southwest for smuggling into the United States. Would you care to elaborate on that? Smuggling what?
Well, smuggling people and smuggling drugs and other things. They involve themselves in various criminal activities and collaborate with narco-traffickers and on techniques in terms of smuggling. There is anecdotal information that Hezbollah provided Mexican narco-traffickers with training in how to make car bombs, which soon became a tactic used by the Mexican narco-traffickers in that country. You have a significant number of cases of individuals who were associated with Hezbollah in Venezuela also having contacts with Mexican narco-traffickers. It's a little known fact that the Mexican cocaine smuggler, Chapo Guzman, who's the biggest...
Public enemy number one.
Yes, absolutely. He spent most of year 2010 in Venezuela, including part of that time on Margarita Island. And we believe that it's there that some of the very highest links with Hezbollah and with some of the Venezuelan generals who were also involved in narco-trafficking took place, and some of that collaboration took place.
And just for the record, he's the leader of the Sinaloa drug cartel that operates in Mexico and other places. And your testimony that he has been trained or works with Hezbollah as well as to bring drugs in the United States?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Hezbollah cooperates with narco-traffickers all along that chain, not only smuggling, but then in the money laundering part of it. Now, whether Guzman was operational there, I don't have proof of that, but my sense of it is that that's where he had contact, regular contact, while he was in Venezuela on Margarita Island with Hezbollah elements. And they cooperate up and down the chain, smuggling, money laundering, training and tactics to confront law enforcement and all of those issues.
I have two more questions, one for Mr. Fulton, one for Dr. Levitt. You mentioned that Hezbollah really is under the auspices, control, not just of Iran, but the supreme leader in Iran. Would you elaborate on that some?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that I would say that Hezbollah is completely and utterly under the control of Iran. In recent history, we've seen Hezbollah emerge as somewhat of an independent actor. However, Iran obviously still maintains significant control over Hezbollah operationally. And when I say the supreme leader, what I mean by that is that based on all of the information I've seen, there's nothing to indicate that there are rogue elements in the IRGC or other elements of the Iranian regime that are working with Hezbollah to undertake operations or to undertake any of the activity that they are involved in. So if there is activity that the Iranian government and Hezbollah are collaborating in, then that is undertaken with, at a minimum, tacit approval of the supreme leader.
All right. Dr. Levitt, what's going to happen next with Hezbollah? I mean, where are they going next, and what buttress off Ambassador Noriega's comments about some of the things that we can do, and also the European Union? Why haven't they labeled this group as a foreign terrorist organization? So where are we headed? What about the Europeans?
Sir.
I'll have to.
Where we're going is more of the same. Hezbollah has multiple interests and identities. It is Lebanese and is interested in its position in Lebanon. It is pan-Shia, and it is in partnership with Iran. What we're seeing is that the identity that's partnership with Iran is trumping the others. It's willing to do things now, whether it's targeting tourists in Bulgaria or Cyprus or flying a drone over southern Israel last fall. They're completely in the Iranian interests, even explicitly against Lebanese interests. That makes Hezbollah very, very dangerous. Why are some European countries uninclined to designate Hezbollah for a variety of reasons, from concern about what might happen to the UNIFIL soldiers, many of whom are European, Italian and French in particular, in southern Lebanon, to what this means for the stability of Lebanon, which is politically quite unstable right now, to concern about retaliatory attacks at home. There are answers to all of those questions. There's no evidence that Hezbollah has ever retaliated with attacks against an entity that has designated it. Let's be honest, the designation is just calling it a name, saying that blowing things up is terrorism. There's no one that does more to undermine stability in Lebanon today than Hezbollah, which dragged Israel and Lebanon both into a war neither country wanted in '06. took over downtown Beirut by force of arms, leading to the deaths of fellow Lebanese in '08 and raided the Shuf Mountains, has been accused by the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, the UN Tribunal, with the assassination of Rafiq Hariri and other political assassinations, and of course now what's happening in Syria, which is going right across the border into Lebanon. We have to be, and I assure you that U.S. and foreign intelligence and law enforcement agencies are quite aware of the need to be very on top of these two threats, Iran, Hezbollah, which operate together and sometimes in competition, especially as we are concerned about the Iran's nuclear program. If the diplomatic track doesn't produce results, the fear is that eventually there might have to be a strike in Iran's nuclear facilities and that Iran would, without a question, respond with asymmetric terrorist attacks worldwide.
Thank you, Dr. Levitt. Yield 5 minutes to the ranking member from California, Mr. Sherman.
Mr. Levitt, Mr. Fulton, if Israel did take military action, obviously Iran would want Hezbollah to open up with all the rockets it's got in southern Lebanon. Is there any doubt that Hezbollah would be willing to do that?
Sir, I would say on the Iranian side, we've seen senior IRGC commanders state explicitly that Hezbollah would respond were Iran to be attacked by Israel, but I'll defer to Dr. Levitt on the internal Hezbollah politics.
And who in Hezbollah has said that?
Thrown under the bus. My assessment is a little bit different. My assessment is that if Iran is attacked by Israel or someone else, that there will definitely be rockets fired at Israel from Lebanon, probably from Gaza, but that depending on who attacks and how they attack and what the damage is and what the collateral damage is, will have a big impact on how many rockets, what types of rockets, because at the end of the day, you shoot a rocket into Israel, Israel can respond back. But the only thing that there's no question is that there will also be reasonably deniable asymmetric terrorist attacks as well.
Turning to Syria, Mr. Levitt, what is the status of Iran and Hezbollah's involvement in Syria? What specifically are they doing to help the Assad regime? And what have Iran and Hezbollah done to prepare for possible transfer of chemical weapons to Hezbollah if the Assad regime is likely to fall or at least lose Damascus and other key parts of Syria?
Iran and Hezbollah are deeply committed to the Assad regime even today, even as it's clear that the Assad regime will in time fall. The question is how it falls and when it falls. Is Assad killed? Does he flee? Do they establish an Alawi statelet along the coast? I think that is something that Hezbollah in particular is very eager to see happen. It's trying to help the Syrian regime establish territorial contiguity within Syria between Damascus and the Alawi areas. Failure to do that, it will provide that contiguity through the Bekaa Valley. One of the reasons this is...
Continuity between Damascus, which is in South Syria, and the Alawite region, which is in North Syria.
Curving along the Lebanese border where the Syrian FSA and others maintain control of some of the area in between. The reason Hezbollah is so keen for this is because one of the things that Hezbollah is most worried about, aside from losing the state sponsorship and all that, which it clearly sees it's going to lose, is the ability to get resupply of rockets and other things from Iran. If it can't get those resupplies, it will be much more constrained in shelling Israel indiscriminately for fear that it won't be able to restock. But if it has access to places like Latakia, which has an airport and which has a seaport that Hezbollah has long used for its international criminal arms proliferation purposes, something that has come up in several FBI investigations of Hezbollah here in this country, I think they feel that would give them some hope. In terms of the chemical weapons, we have a lot of questions. We're very concerned, but in particular, we were concerned when we saw Hezbollah setting up small, little, movable training camps right next to chemical weapon depots. Did they do that because they felt that was a good place where they could set up camp and people probably wouldn't shell them for fear of hitting the chemical weapons depots? Did they set that camp up because it's a good place to be to raid the storage site in the event that the regime falls? Both? We don't know. But as you, sir, said, and I couldn't say it better, that has to be the red lines.
And I assume Hezbollah has the technical capacity to use these chemical weapons in the event that they get their hands on them. Does anyone disagree?
I think the biggest concern is that they get them. Once you have them, you can get the capability to use them, especially since you're so close to Iran. So the
And
biggest
you're
issue,
right there with the Assad regime, so you only need a few other people to help you out.
exactly.
You've talked about Europe not designating Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. What can the United States do to push Europe in the right direction on that? I'll take the answer from any one of the three of you.
I just came back yesterday from a trip to Europe, Rome, Paris, and Berlin. The good news is I saw more movement in those three countries on this issue than I have in a long time, including since I was last in several of those
I
countries.
mean, here's a terrorist organization that carries out terrorism on European soil.
Europeans often see things in big dialectics. For them, there's no longer a debate, is Hezbollah engaged in these activities, which there long was.
Right.
Now the debate is this the right policy? What would it mean for stability in Lebanon? What would it mean for UNIFIL? I believe those are all answerable questions, and I made what I thought was a forceful argument to them that they need to do this not as a favor to the United States, not as a favor to Israel, but as a responsibility that they have to their constituents. Hezbollah has challenged them. Hezbollah is active in Europe, again, operationally, and let's be clear, there was never a point when it was not active in Europe in terms of logistics, finance, arms procurement, or sending people into Israel or elsewhere to carry attacks through Europe.
And finally, the Europeans care a lot about overthrowing Assad. They may or may not want to provide weapons, but here's a chance to help the Free Syrian Forces. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Cook, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Judge. It's kind of ironic, I guess. Many years ago, I was a company commander, spent a long time as I said, as a leader of troops of Marines, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, which happened to be the unit that was blown up by Hezbollah in 1983, and we're perhaps gone full circle. I appreciate the ranking member asking the question about chemical weapons, and that's what I was going to ask, but I'm also concerned about the Strait of Hormuz from a military standpoint, but you got an organization that almost, if you described it correctly, if I understood it correctly, they're almost like the Spetsnaz to a certain degree of Iran. And they have issues right now as to what is their international border, can they stretch it out? And it's that choke point, which is very, very inflammatory, and which many people think, you know, if a shooting engagement starts, it could very well be. And I was surprised that there's been no activity against Qatar or United Arab Emirates because of their support for the United States and other more moderate regimes. And I just wanted to see if you would comment on possibility that this agency that has been at the forefront of Iranian policy might be involved in that area in the future.
Sir, well, the IRGC has said time and time again, as has the Chief of their Armed Forces General Staff, that they intend to close the Strait of Hormuz if they were struck or if their interests were threatened otherwise. Now, my expertise does not lie in Iran's conventional military power. My understanding from the assessments that I've seen is that they could close the Strait of Hormuz, but it would be for a very limited period of time. But absolutely, if that were to happen, the IRGC would be in the lead of those operations. Similarly, if there were to be any type of sort of flashpoint conflict in the Persian Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, it would very much likely be the IRGC and its Navy at the forefront of that, sir.
I'll just add two quick comments. The first, on the 1983 Beirut bombings, the relevance to today is that In the book, I was able to find, for the book, a significant amount of declassified intelligence, declassified CIA reports, FBI reports, did a lot of interviews with current and former officials, and it's quite clear across the board that the assessment after the fact was that our failure to respond to those attacks in a way that was meaningful to Iran and to Hezbollah, again after the Khobar Towers bombing in 1996, emboldened both Iran's Quds Force, IRGC more generally, and Hezbollah. We're at that type of a precipice again right now. In terms of the Gulf regimes, I think there are lots of parts of the book that will surprise people, maybe nothing more so than the fat chapter on Hezbollah in Southeast Asia. But I think some people will be surprised by how extensive the 2 chapters are on Hezbollah in the Gulf. One chapter more historically oriented, leading up to the Khobar Towers bombing, but getting to some of the earlier history. And the second one, getting much closer to today, Hezbollah established a dedicated unit to target coalition forces in Iraq, Unit 3800. And if you talk to our allies and friends in the Gulf area, of course they're concerned about Iran's nuclear capabilities, power projection in the region. They are no less concerned about Hezbollah's activities in the region. Iran, I believe, not only is interested in regime preservation, but also it remains today, as it was at its founding, interested in exporting the revolution. And that starts for them in the Gulf.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Yoho, for 5 minutes. We're going to try to finish before votes. Votes have already started, but we will try to finish the hearing so y'all don't have to come back. Go ahead. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you guys' testimony. And the big thing I see, that concerns me probably more than anything is the infiltration into the Western Hemisphere of Hezbollah. My question is, for all 3 of you, how much effect do the sanctions on Iran for funding to Hezbollah, how much effect does that have, our sanctions, and what can we do to make them stronger? And also, how much funding is Hezbollah maybe getting out of Venezuela that we may not know about?
Well, as a matter of fact, for our sanctions on Iran to be more effective, we should be going after Venezuelan institutions.
That's what I was thinking.
There's the Sadarat Bank of Iran, which is involved in all of these illegal activities and rogue nuclear programs, et cetera, wholly owns a bank called the Banco Internacional de Desarrollo in Venezuela. They also have tens or probably hundreds of millions of dollars in every bank in Venezuela today. The Iranians do. And Hezbollah also is able to skim some money out of some of the fundraising activities that they do in their own right, but also in some of these criminal activities with terrorist organizations. So they're able to skim money off of that. So, and I would, my sense of it is they probably take hundreds of millions of dollars because of the foothold that they have and the complicity they have in Venezuela.
Before we go on to Dr. Levitt, what's your opinion with the changing of guards in Venezuela?
It bodes very ill, sir, because Chavez, for all of his bombast and everything, was a strong character who could modulate some of these extreme influences that he comes under. Maduro, on the other hand, is demonstrating that he's very weak, and he seems to be following a script that the Cubans have laid out for him. And the Iranians and Hezbollah have every intention of keeping hold of that the platform that they have in Venezuela. And I'm afraid that without a strong hand, that whatever regime or whatever government takes over for Chavez will not be able to manage this, what Hezbollah and Iran is up to in their territory.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Levitt?
Briefly, the issue of Western infiltrating into the United States in particular is one that is mostly one of, when it comes to the hard facts, of vulnerability. There's no question, Roger's right, there's a lot of overlap in terms of smuggling routes, but there's only one known instance of a Hezbollah operative entering the United States from crossing the border illegally. You should take no comfort from that. He was one of the most dangerous Hezbollah people ever to be in this country. I refer to him as kind of Hezbollah's 007. And the person, the Lebanese Mexican who smuggled him in, admitted that he has smuggled, I think it was something like 1,500 other people in the country, and there's vulnerability. We don't know. I can't tell you that any of them were Hezbollah. I can't tell you none of them were Hezbollah. But that one individual was a pretty scary guy. In terms of the sanctions and the impact on Hezbollah, The good news is we've done some very, very good work there. There's always more to be done because our adversaries don't just capitulate. It's like squeezing a balloon, so they move someplace else. One of the ways Hezbollah has tried to respond not only to the sanctions against itself, against Hezbollah, but against our sanctions on Iran, which have made it more difficult for Iran to be able to be as generous in funding to Hezbollah, is to expand ever more so into crime, especially into narcotics trafficking, moving the product, especially from South America across the 10th parallel, which law enforcement refers to as Highway 10, to Africa and northward into Europe. Another point that we raised when we talked to the Europeans, Hezbollah, aside from its terrorist activity, is deeply engaged in criminal activity in the continent in particular, and including moving drugs into Europe. This gives us a whole nother set of tools that we can use. Roger said we should see more indictments. I expect that you will. I know that you will.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back because I got to go do my duty and vote. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I have one last question. Your testimony mentioned not only Hezbollah in Iran, but the Quds Force in Iran working together. Can you explain to me briefly the relationship, if any, between Hezbollah, Quds Force, and Iran working with those two organizations together? Whoever wants, Mr. Fulton, go ahead. Whoever wants to weigh in on that.
Sure, Mr.
That'd be the last question.
Mr. Chairman, I would just add that, again, that the Quds Force is it's a component of the IRGC. The IRGC is first and foremost concerned with regime preservation and is led fundamentally by the Supreme Leader, in that the commander of the IRGC and the Quds Force both report directly to the Supreme Leader. The Quds Force is the organization in Iran that takes the lead in its cooperation with Hezbollah.
Dr. Levitt?
Hezbollah is Iran's creation, and the Quds Force is its primary interlocutor with Lebanese Hezbollah. My written statement goes into great detail about the nature of the relationship between them, as does our Institute report on Hezbollah and the Quds Force and Iran's shadow war with the West. I want to make 2 points that are maybe contrary to conventional wisdom, however, as we look at this recent trend of events and threats. One, as I alluded to earlier, is that we see these two groups engaging in significant operational cooperation together, as they always have, but we also see them a little bit in competition. Right now, from the Quds Force's perspective, it's Hezbollah 1, Quds Force nothing. Unfortunately, that means Hezbollah has carried out one successful terrorist attack, Burgas, Bulgaria, and the Quds Force has not. On the flip side, we also see an element of a lack of deconfliction. So in January of last year, when Hussein Atris, a Swedish Hezbollah operative, was arrested there, in a case that has ties back to South America, explosives that he was sending there, just a couple of weeks later, an IRGC Quds Force cell that was putting together sticky bombs was discovered there, not through any of our activities, but because the bomb they were putting together exploded in their hands. It appears that there was not enough deconfliction. You'd think that the Quds Force would have stopped its activities in Thailand at a time when Thai, U.S., Israeli, all international law enforcement and intelligence agencies were supremely focused on Thailand. We've seen it in another case that has gotten basically no press, and that's Bulgaria. Not only was the attack in Burgas, Bulgaria, the second Hezbollah attempt to carry out an attack there, but just about a week or two later, authorities found an IRGC official conducting surveillance of a synagogue in Sofia. So again, it's unclear why there's this level of deconfliction, but there is.
Yeah, last word, Ambassador Noriega, briefly.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. 20 seconds. IRGC has a presence, a foothold in Venezuela. There are about 70 Iranian companies, many of them sanctioned by the UN, EU, US, for involvement in the ballistic missile program or the illicit nuclear program, have industrial footprint in the United States and obviously counts there too. And IRGC Major General Amir Ali Hajizadeh of the Revolutionary Guard Corps' aerospace program has visited Venezuela on 2 occasions in the last 3 years, sites nearby of nitroglycerin and nitrocellulose plants associated with Venezuelan petroleum industry. So there's something going on the chemical side too there that needs to be looked into.
I want to thank all 3 of our witnesses for being here today and your expertise. Without objection, the chart, page 1 and 2 of the global map and the detailed, the back page will be made part of the record, and this committee hearing is adjourned. Thank you once again.